You know, when you walk into a theater before a show, the stage is really just these flat wooden boards. I mean, it's completely bare.
Right, just an empty room, basically.
Exactly. But then the lights go down, the play starts, and those same flat boards suddenly become, I don't know, a haunted castle or bustling Parisian street or like a claustrophobic war zone.
Yeah, the illusion takes over.
And the physical wood doesn't change at all. What changes is the story we decide to project onto it.
The physical reality of the space is completely static, but the psychological reality, what that space actually represents to the people looking at it, that is incredibly fluid. It morphs based on whoever's standing on the stage at the time.
Well, welcome in. It is Tuesday, March 24th, 2026. And for today's deep dive, we are looking at the ultimate empty stage, a landscape so vast, so incredibly hostile, and so seemingly unchanging, but one that has played wildly different roles in our collective imagination over the last 2 centuries.
It really has.
So pull up a chair because we are heading into the sand today.
Specifically, we're talking about the North African desert, the Sahara.
Right. We are looking at a brilliant piece of research by Karim Bejjit, published in the journal Confluence. And our mission today is to trace this incredible journey of the North African desert through the American imagination.
It's a wild ride.
It really is. We are going to follow its evolution from this terrifying nightmare of captivity and death to a space of existential romance, and then finally to a modern tourist destination grappling with a globally connected reality.
Because the core paradox here, the thing that grounds Bejjit's entire paper, is that the physical sand of the Sahara, the blistering heat, the endless dunes, none of that has fundamentally changed.
No, the environment is exactly the same.
Exactly. The temperature is the same, the lack of water is the same,
Yeah.
but what the desert actually means to the people traveling through it have flipped entirely upside down.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before the desert was a place where you'd go to, find yourself on some expensive spiritual retreat.
Yeah.
It was a place where you desperately, fervently hoped you wouldn't get lost.
Oh, absolutely.
We're starting in the early 19th century. This is the era of the nightmare frontier.
Yeah. If you were an early American, your primary association with the North African coast was just profound vulnerability.
Complete terror.
Total terror. We're talking about the early days of the Republic. American merchant ships are aggressively expanding their trade routes,
Yeah.
right, into the Mediterranean and down the African coast.
Right.
And the southern shores of Morocco, specifically beyond an area called Oued Noun, were notoriously treacherous for navigation. The currents were tricky, the charts were poor, and shipwrecks were agonizingly common.
I need to pause you there to get some context, because Bejjit's research talks about this sparking an entire literary genre called the Barbary captivity narrative.
Yes.
Can we break that down? Like, why Barbary and why were Americans suddenly so vulnerable there?
Well, Barbary was the term Europeans and Americans used for the coastal regions of North Africa, derived from the Berber people who lived there.
Okay, that makes sense.
And before the American Revolution, American ships were protected by the British Royal Navy. But once America won its independence, that massive naval shield just disappeared.
Oh, wow. So they were just out there exposed.
Completely exposed. Suddenly you have these lone American merchant ships sailing past shores, controlled by various semi-autonomous groups and corsairs. If a ship went aground off the vast, unmapped stretches of the Moroccan South, the crew was totally on their own, stranded in an alien environment.
And surviving the actual shipwreck was just the beginning of the horror. I mean, these accounts became massive bestsellers back in the States.
Huge bestsellers.
The most famous one, which Bejjit highlights, is Captain James Riley's account from 1815. He was the captain of the American brig Commerce, which wrecked off that southern Moroccan coast.
And Riley's account is just a visceral record of raw physical torment. He and his crew wash up on the beach, exhausted, and are quickly captured by nomadic Bedouin tribesmen.
It's brutal.
It is. What follows is a complete, systematic stripping of their humanity. They are stripped completely naked, they are starved, given barely enough camel's milk to just stay alive.
Just barely hanging on.
Barely. They're forced to march vast distances barefoot across the scorching sand. They're subjected to the absolute extremes of the elements, their bodies quite literally withering away into the sun. I mean, Riley writes about his men becoming walking skeletons.
Salvation for Riley and his men only came when they finally managed to reach the walled port city of Essaouira. And a British trader named William Wilshire essentially bought their freedom, leveraging a diplomatic treaty that mandated the release of captured citizens.
Right, a very narrow escape.
Very narrow. But it wasn't just Riley's book that captured the public's morbid curiosity. You have Judah Paddock's account from the shipwreck of the Oswego.
Oh, that one is devastating.
There's this incredibly evocative scene where Paddock, who is a hardened sailor, simply falls to the sand weeping at the sight of his stranded shipmates. He is completely overwhelmed by the absolute barrenness of the landscape.
We really have to ask why these stories were such massive cultural touchstones. Riley's book was reprinted every 2 or 3 years for decades.
Even Abraham Lincoln read it. Right?
Yes, read by a young Abraham Lincoln. Early Americans were fascinated by the desert as a space of total erasure and disintegration. Think about the American self-image at the time.
Like taming the wilderness, conquering the frontier, subduing nature to build civilization.
Right, the whole manifest destiny mindset. Man over nature.
Exactly.
But exactly the opposite happens in the Sahara. The desert completely inverted that power dynamic. It tested American fortitude against the harshest possible elements, and the wilderness was the one doing the subduing.
Man was definitely not winning that fight.
Not at all. The American captain, used to being the master of his ship and his destiny, is reduced to a naked, starving captive traded for a few blankets.
Listening to this, it sounds exactly like how we describe astronauts crash landing on a hostile alien planet with zero life support.
That's a great analogy.
I mean, the desert wasn't just a different geography, it was an abyss. It was the total, terrifying absence of civilization. Which brings us to the pivot.
Yeah.
How do you get from Captain Riley starring in the sand, begging for a drop of water, to people willingly packing their bags to go look at the dunes?
Well, the transition from terror to romance required one massive and admittedly very problematic shift in the real world: infrastructure.
Okay.
The spread of European colonialism, specifically French and Spanish military and administrative control over these regions in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, that fundamentally changed the relationship between the Western traveler and the sand.
How exactly? What did that infrastructure actually look like? Are we talking like paved highways?
Not initially paved highways, but they mapped the void, they charted the oases, they established deep desert military outposts, telegraph lines, and eventually motor routes.
So they sort of tamed the logistics of it.
Exactly. They integrated the Sahara into a global colonial economy. And by doing so, they provided a massive invisible safety net for the Westerner. The desert was still physically harsh. The sun was still hot, the distances still vast, but the existential threat of permanent, unrecorded captivity or death was drastically reduced.
You weren't going to just vanish.
Right. You were moving through a territory that, on paper at least, answered to a European flag. A writer from Paris could take a steamer to Algiers, a train to the edge of the desert, and a military-escorted convoy right into the dunes.
So they essentially put a net under the tightrope.
Yes.
And that safety net completely changes who goes there. It's no longer unlucky sailors washing up on the beach. It's writers, artists, and adventurers actively choosing to seek out the emptiness.
And French writers really spearheaded this shift in the literary imagination. Take Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, the famous aviator and author.
Oh, right. He wrote The Little Prince.
Exactly. He famously crashes his plane in the Libyan desert. He's hallucinating, severely dehydrated, fully expecting to die, and a Bedouin man appears and saves him.
Very different from the Riley story.
Completely different. Look at how he writes about that encounter. He doesn't frame the Bedouin as a terrifying alien captor the way Riley did. He calls his savior humanity man incarnate.
Wow!
Yeah. The desert is no longer a site of erasure. It has become a grand, poetic stage for encounters with the pure essence of mankind.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the definitive American voice of this romantic existential era is Paul Bowles.
Oh, Bowles is fascinating.
He really is. Bejjit's research spends a lot of time on Bowles, and he takes this idea of the desert as a spiritual mirror and just pushes it to its absolute psychological limit.
It really goes all the way with it.
He writes novels like The Sheltering Sky and various short stories where characters are fleeing their jaded, mechanized, post-World War II urban lives in New York or Paris. They go to the Sahara looking for solace. They want something real.
But Bowles doesn't let them off easy. I mean, he isn't writing travel brochures.
No, not at all.
The desert in his work isn't a gentle spa where you do yoga and feel refreshed.
Yeah.
It's a profound, often destructive psychological force.
Oh, it totally consumes them. Look at his short story, A Distant Episode.
Oh, that one is rough.
It is pure, visceral horror. A Western professor goes into the deep desert, gets his tongue cut out by bandits, and is forced to perform as a jester made of tin cans.
Just Brute.
It's savage. The desert still has this sinister, destructive power in literature, but it's an existential destruction now, not just physical starvation.
Right. And Bowles articulated this through a philosophical concept he called the baptism of solitude.
The baptism of solitude.
Yeah. He described the Sahara as a holy mineral landscape, a place where the silence is so absolute, the visual field so stripped of familiar markers that memory itself disappears.
It just wipes you clean.
Exactly. You are stripped down to nothing but your own breathing and the beating of your heart. It fundamentally alters who you are. And the philosopher Jean Baudrillard echoed this later, talking about the desert silence of time.
The silence of time.
Yeah, Baudrillard argued that the visual emptiness of the desert creates a watermark on your vision. It lingers in your eyes long after you leave.
Wait, let me make sure I'm following this. Baudrillard says it creates a watermark on your vision. I'm struggling with that a bit. Do you mean literally, like snow blindness from the bright sand? Or is this a purely psychological metaphor?
It's a psychological and perceptive imprint. Imagine staring at a bright light and then closing your eyes.
Okay, yeah.
You still see the shape of the pulpit.
Yeah, that glowing spot.
Exactly. Baudrillard is saying the absolute minimalism of the desert, the sheer scale of nothingness, burns itself into your cognitive processing. When you leave the Sahara and walk into a crowded room in Paris or New York, you're constantly trying to project that vast emptiness onto the noise. You can't unsee the void.
I see. That makes sense. But let me push back on this whole era because Bejjit touches on the inherent irony
Yeah,
here.
there's a lot of irony.
Right. So these Western writers essentially relied on military outposts, modern logistics, and colonial safety nets just so they could go out into the sand, feel delightfully empty, and experience existential dread on their own terms. Isn't this just a psychological captivity replacing a physical one? They aren't enslaved by Bedouins anymore. They're willingly enslaving themselves to the idea of the desert as an escape hatch.
That is a brilliant observation, and it's central to understanding mid-century travel literature. They were actively mourning the loss of the primitive, uncorrupted world while entirely relying on the modern, mechanized mechanisms that were busy destroying it.
It's hypocritical, honestly.
It is. They possess the ultimate privilege, which is mobility. They could leave the desert whenever the baptism of solitude got to be a bit too much. The local inhabitants, of course, did not have that luxury.
Right.
They were living their actual lives in a place the writers were using as a metaphorical playground.
So if Bowles and his contemporaries were essentially using the desert as a giant sandbox for their own existential crises, that bubble had to pop eventually, right? Because the people actually living there aren't static background characters.
The illusion absolutely shatters. Bejjit traces this collision through 3 modern American travelogues, and the progression of how the writers react to this changing reality is incredibly revealing.
Okay, let's look at those.
You start in the 1960s and 70s with John Hopkins. In his Tangier Diaries, he still desperately views the desert as a healing antidote to what he calls the cabin fever of the modern city.
Still clinging to the romance.
Very much so. He does find moments of pure enchantment, but he can't ignore the creeping reality. He notes the military checkpoints, the armored vehicles of the post-colonial legacy, the hum of generators disrupting the silence.
The real world is bleeding in.
Exactly. But then we move to the 1990s with William Langevish's Sahara Unveiled.
Okay.
Langevish is a journalist, not an accidental novelist like Bowles, and he brings a much more grounded anthropological lens to the Algerian Sahara. He isn't looking for a spiritual baptism. He's looking at the logistics of water, the politics of borders, the actual society functioning in the heat.
The prose styles reflect that shift perfectly, I bet. I mean, Bowles is dreamy and terrifying. Langevish is sharp and analytical.
Spot on.
The moment that really stood out to me in the Bejjit paper is Langevish's encounter with the chief judge of Tamanrasset.
Yes, that's a crucial scene.
The author expects to find a sort of isolated, perhaps tragic figure stranded in this remote outpost. Instead, he meets a man who completely upends his assumptions.
The judge is highly educated, speaks 5 languages fluently, reads widely from global literature, and is intimately aware of the larger world outside the dunes.
He's probably more worldly than the author.
In many ways, yes. And the crucial point Langevish realizes is that the judge actively chooses his life in the remote desert. He embraces the frustration, the harshness, and the profound richness of it, and he completely rejects the American author's underlying sympathy.
He doesn't need pity.
Not at all. Through the judge, Langevish realizes the desert remains, in his words, unsubdued. It's not a museum exhibit for Westerners to wander through. It's a living, breathing, complex society with its own agency.
And then we get the final, perhaps most jarring dose of reality with Jeffrey Taylor's 2004 book, Valley of the Casbahs.
Oh, this one is a rude awakening.
It really is. Taylor goes to the Moroccan Sahara, specifically chasing that old European romantic myth. He's read the classic accounts. He wants to cross the vast, untouched sands on camelback. He wants the epic adventure, the silence of time, the whole package.
He wants the stage to be set exactly as it was in 1945.
Exactly. And instead, he gets tedious, grinding travel. He gets constant bickering with his guides over money and
The
logistics.
boring reality of travel.
Right. He doesn't find mystical nomads dispensing ancient wisdom over a campfire. He finds impoverished, concrete villages, terribly frustrated and unemployed youth neglected by the political center in Rabat, and locals sitting around watching global news on Al Jazeera.
It's the modern world.
It's like saving up for years for a trip to a legendary, untouched, secret beach you read about in a classic novel, and when you finally hike miles to get there, there's a Wi-Fi cafe.
And playing top 40 pop music?
Yes. With teenagers scrolling on their phones complaining about the signal, the mythical Sahara that Taylor was desperately looking for is just gone. It's been replaced by the real world, the stage lights came on, and everyone was just wearing normal clothes.
In anthropology, there's a term for what Taylor experienced. It's called the shattering of the denial of coevalness.
Hold on, denial of coevalness is a bit dense for me. Break that down like I'm 5.
Sure. Think of coeval as meaning existing at the same time.
Okay.
For centuries, travel writers essentially pretended that the people living in remote places, like the desert, existed in some mythical, ancient past. They wrote about them as if they were trapped in antiquity, fundamentally separate from the modern timeline the writer lived in, denying that they share the same now.
So treating them like extras in a historical drama, rather than modern humans.
Precisely. But Taylor's account forces the realization of what anthropologists call a disconcerting contemporaneity.
Meaning they're contemporaries.
Right. The local inhabitants share the exact same modern present as the tourist. They know about global politics. They're plugged into the same supply chains, the same media networks, the same economic frustrations. The Western traveler can no longer pretend they have stepped back in time.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? Why should you care about the literary evolution of a desert half a world away? Why does it matter how some 19th century sailor or 20th century novelist wrote about the sand?
Well, because it proves that the way we describe a landscape says so much more about us, our insecurities, our power dynamics, our cultural blind spots, than it does about the actual geography.
It's all projection.
Entirely. For 200 years, the North African desert has acted as a giant mineral mirror for the American psyche. In the 1800s, it reflected our deep anxieties about vulnerability, the limits of our new republic, and the terrifying loss of agency.
That fear of the abyss.
Right. Then, in the mid-1900s, it reflected our existential dread and our desire to escape the mechanized trauma of the modern city. And today, it reflects our discomfort with a fully globalized world. Our jarring realization that there are no more blank spots on the map where we can go to project our fantasies undisturbed.
We keep asking the sand to play a part, and the sand just keeps being sand.
Exactly.
Which leaves me with one final lingering thought for you to chew on as you go about your week. As global climate change continues to rapidly expand arid landscapes across the world, making extreme deserts a much larger part of our shared everyday reality, how will our stories change next?
That's the big question.
When the desert is no longer a distant, exotic destination you have to take a steamer to reach, but is actively expanding right at our doorstep, will we revert back to those terrifying tales of survival from the 1800s? Or will we find a completely new way to project our humanity onto the sand?
It's a question we're going to have to answer sooner rather than later. I mean, the physical stage is expanding, and we're all going to have to figure out our lines.
We really are. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the stories you hear, keep looking at the wooden boards beneath the scenery, and we'll see you next time.